What's going on? It's JT. This is Linux 2019, or I should say Linux and Music Production 2019, because that's what I've been doing a lot since last year. You see, the last time I did Linux 2018, March 3rd, I released it on March 3rd, 2019 on YouTube. A lot has changed since then. I'm looking at the show notes, I guess you could call, or the minutes for podcast Linux 2018, and there is so much in here compared to what I have to say about Linux or what I've been doing in Linux in 2019. Just to run down the list, just some notable stuff. Let's see. I'm still a big fan of Cherry Tree, the note-taking application. I talked about a bunch of different analytics, web analytics software, and CMSs, content management software, for use on Linux servers. A lot of those were open source. And I spoke a little bit about Spectre meltdown attacks and IBM acquiring Red Hat. It's a lot. That's a long list. And for last year, for 2019, I don't have too much to say about notable events or things I've learned. Oh yeah, so Linux 2018, I put that out in March 3rd of last year. My last YouTube video was posted in September of last year. And that was an underground track I had mixed for some guys. A track I had mixed for some underground artists when I was about, I think, 16 or 17. T.O.P. It'll Happen. Momma told me. Love that track. I'm still hopeful that they don't have an issue with me putting it up there. I'm not sure what the group or that specific artist is doing now. I don't know if they have an issue with it. If they do, I hope they reach out to me and let me know. I don't want them thinking that I'm trying to take any credit for it. All I did was record it and mix it. I don't know who did the beat, and I don't remember the original artist's name. But anyways, let's talk about Linux. I'm going to go down my list. As I already said, I haven't been doing a lot of Linux in the last year or so. A lot of new things, that is. Not much notable to be talking about here. What I can start with this. cPanel, for those of you who don't know, cPanel is proprietary software. It's a closed source software that runs on a lot of shared hosting plans. A lot of web hosting companies use cPanel in their web hosting products. Excuse me. And they changed their licensing, the pricing for the licensing for customers that have VPSs, meaning they manage multiple cPanel accounts with a software that's bundled with it called Web Host Manager. I'm not going to get too big into the details about the difference between all of that, but I will say that cPanel and Direct Admin are the two of the most popular web hosting products out there, used on a lot of Linux web server hosting plans. Anyways, cPanel last year, they changed their licensing, their pricing model, which affected a lot of pricing throughout web hosting companies in the industry. The entire industry was affected. Is, I should say, because it still is. I'm recording this in the middle of 2020, and web hosting companies are still finding ways to deal with the changing in the pricing, the price changes. It's affecting the changes because the change in the modeling, the change in the licensing has affected all web hosting companies and web hosting products. So whether you're paying directly for it or not, your pricing for your specific web hosting plan is likely to have been affected whether you know it or not. That was interesting. And so when that happened around fall of 2019, that really got me curious. It really got me thinking about an open source server management program, application for managing my Linux server. Something other than cPanel. Because I'm always looking for open source software to use, not just free open source software. So I got curious and I went down the rabbit hole and I found a bunch of different interesting options. The most notable one was Webmin, which has these sister products, Virtual Min. I don't remember the other ones. And it looks nice. It was interesting. It does the job. You know, everything, a lot of the things that cPanel does, Webmin does. You know, so create your email accounts, manage FTP accounts, file management, being able to do all that stuff, the DNS records, doing all of those changes in a pretty GUI. Webmin did plenty of that stuff. I used it for a little bit, learned how to do a couple things with it, but I got to the point where I started thinking, at this point of my experience in Linux, maybe I just shouldn't use one. And there are other ones out there too. Webmin, it's okay. It's not bad. There's also CentOS Web Panel. I already mentioned Direct Admin. I can't remember some of the other ones. And of course, there's always file management software that deals with just files that you can use depending on what type of setup you need. For example, OwnCloud or Nextcloud, which are primarily file storage applications. They still use the LAMP stack, Apache, MySQL, PHP, but it's more geared toward file management than overall server management. Anyways, when that happened, I got curious and I started thinking about, what do I need? Do I really need a cPanel server with the Linux experience, the command line experience I have? So that was something that I had been bouncing around with and experimenting with in 2019. And I'm keeping this in 2019. I'm not going to talk about 2020, even though I'm almost at the end of 2020. So that was a big thing for 2019. cPanel changing their pricing and cheap people like me going, all right, well, how can I get a bigger bang for my buck? There was also a little bit of learning some bit about Ansible, which is a IT automation tool. Best way I can describe it. It's software that you can put on the server to help you manage other servers, which can, in a way, do some of the same stuff as cPanel, which I was just talking about. It has a GUI, but it's mainly command line. And I think it's a Red Hat product as well. I think that runs as a competitor to Ubuntu's Kubernetes. I think. Let's see. Who makes Kubernetes? Google makes Kubernetes. Google makes Kubernetes. original authors. Okay, that's cool. Anyways, I don't do too much. I didn't do too much with that after about a couple months or so. Gladly, not gonna get into much about the reasons behind that. Going past Ansible, I've been doing a lot of cybersecurity training, specifically Firewall D and CSF. Firewall D seems to be a default app. No, it's not default. I shouldn't say that. But it's more popular. It's a popular firewall tool now outside of UFW, which is many times pre-installed on Ubuntu-based Linux distros. CSF is, let me see, what was it? Config server, security, and firewall. It's a very, first of all, it's very easy to use. Configuration files is mainly one configuration file. There are comments, documentation within the file. It's easy to whitelist ports and do a bunch of other stuff that you need to do. And the documentation is thorough. If you're on a cPanel server, specifically managed VPS, you can install the CSF cPanel plugin. And it's even easier to use within the GUI and WHM. And it does so much. It's not just a firewall. It also helps you monitor system processes, check logs, and a bunch of other stuff. The CSF is kind of a suite. Whereas Firewall D is very simple, to the point, straightforward. It's really easy to use, I think. And it has they both have this profile option where you can you can quickly set a different configuration profile set of rules. So Firewall D, I forgot specifically what it's called for each of them, but it's easy to do. They're easy to use, they're easy to navigate. I've been playing around with those two a good bit. Especially since that stuff is good. That stuff applies, Firewall D especially, applies to desktop systems as well as the server. So I can use those skills not only on my server, but also on PCs if I wanted to, which is cool. For website security, I did a lot of reading about HTTP headers, specifically content security policy, feature policy, and HTTP strict transport policy, transport security, HSTS. These are basically, I like to consider CSP a software firewall or a code firewall. And the HTTP headers are pretty much bits of information that your browser or whatever you use, you get that stuff in the command line in your terminal if you want. But anytime you try to fetch a web page or data from a web server, the information that comes back alongside the actual data are generally referred to as HTTP headers. So whether the server is using Windows, BSD, Linux, is it using Apache or Nginx? What software is it using? The banner, that's what you can call it, banner information. If you ever use any browser extensions, such as Wapalizer is one. I forgot the other one. I really forgot the other one. Let me see if I can find out. I want to remember. I don't think I'm gonna. Banner grabber. Netcraft. Yeah, that's it. Netcraft. Netcraft and Wapalizer. Those browser extensions. If you install those and go to a web page, you can see a lot of that information. And it's not hidden. The browser gets it. It just doesn't always show it to you unless you ask for it in certain ways. But that information can be used to find specific vulnerabilities in your server. So it's interesting to be able to find ways to clean some of that stuff up. Now, CSP, Content Security Policy. The easiest way to explain that is it's a block of code that you'll put in your HTXS file on Linux. I don't know what you do on Windows. I'm not going to try and guess. But it's a big block of code where you're basically whitelisting what type of content can load from. So if you have an HTML page and you have a YouTube video embedded, if you have CSP set to enforce whatever that policy is, content security policy, if that YouTube URL isn't in the CSP, it won't show it. The console of your browser, the developer tools, the console option may tell you it won't load this. It may not tell you exactly what it is, but it'll tell you it didn't load this resource from style source or inline, etc. Something. It won't load it unless it's in the CSP. If you're using jQuery, something from the jQuery external library, let's see, maybe a Bootstrap external package with or without sub-resource integrity. I'll probably just put a link to that. I could put a link to that instead of yapping too much about that. The sub-resource integrity, regardless if that is in there or not, it needs to be in the CSP. Anything that you want to allow web pages to load, it has to be mentioned, has to be specified in the CSP. And the reason for that is it helps protect people who visit your website from man-in-the-middle attacks. Any type of code injections, especially SQL injections for the WordPress, Drupal, Joomla, the LAMP stack CMSs. PHP is always pushing out updates. Since I've been using Linux servers, since I've been messing with Linux servers, they've gone from 5 point something to 7.3, 4, I think 7.4 right now. It's on its way out. So there are constantly being updates to PHP, and you never know when you might miss an update for PHP or for MySQL or MariaDB. So yeah, the point of the CSP is if someone injects something into your website and you don't know, at the very least, depending on how it's coded, hopefully they didn't actually get to the HTXS file as well, because that is possible, and change that. Because if they didn't change that, then the CSP can block that from showing. That also applies to, and again, like I said, YouTube videos, so embedded content, which is another way of dealing with, another way of doing cyber attacks, clickjacking, where you have some link overlaid over the web page, and no matter where you click, it takes you to somewhere else. Or, you're embedding another website in your website, and now you can, sometimes you end up inheriting any security risks from the embedded website, which of course isn't a good thing. So that's CSP. Feature policy is exactly what it sounds like. It's for the browser features. So your mic, your speaker, MIDI is an option, which I thought was interesting. And let me see. It's mic, speaker, MIDI, and there are a couple other ones. But the point of that is to ensure your website isn't enabling features that it doesn't need. When's the last time you've been on a website where you needed to play MIDI? In 2020, where you needed MIDI enabled. Unless you're on some video conference software, it shouldn't be able to enable those features. So you can use feature policy, again, something you put in your HTXS file, to say, don't enable this. Disable these. Disable all of it. And if it is enabled, disable it. HTTP strict transport security is really interesting. It's the way I explain it is HTTPS is forcing a website to use an SSL certificate. So a little green lock or a huge green bar, depending on the browser and the type of SSL, DV or OV. No, EV, sorry. Domain validated or extended validation, which would be the huge green lock and the name, the organization's name beside the padlock in your browser. That's done at the server. The server does that, or the website does that. HSTS, HTTP Strict Transport Security, does that at the browser level. The browser will take, if you go to a website that has HSTS enabled, it saves that URL and its time to live, the TTL, how long this should be active for, that HTTP header for that domain. It adds it into a text file for your browser and says, anytime we get anything from this page, we are going to ask for HTTPS. Forget what the website says or the server says. Whatever the user types into this browser, we are only going to accept HTTPS traffic. It's really interesting. Can be a pain in the butt if you configure it wrong or your SSL expires. I've seen that. I won't say what website that happened to, but I remember going to a website that had HSTS and their SSL expired. And with HSTS, it's not like when other websites, well, most websites have an SSL expire and you get the option to continue anyway and accept the risk. HSTS doesn't allow you to do that. It says this site can only be accessed with HTTPS because it had HSTS. So because of that, we can't show you the web page. Now there are ways to go around that depending on your browser, wherever you've been to the domain before. If you want to mess with the browser configuration files, but the average user isn't going to do that. They're just going to see they can't look at the website. They're locked out. So that's something to keep in mind. So regardless of whether you're using an annual SSL or something that expires every 3 months like Let's Encrypt, make sure those SSLs are being updated on time. Otherwise, you can lock yourself out of you can lock other people out of your website. So that's HTTP headers. And if you want to know more about it, you can check out securityheaders.com. There's also the Mozilla Observatory. I wonder if I talked about that before. Let me check. Okay, so I'm checking Linux 2018 show notes, and I don't see that. Anyone that has a website, I'd recommend checking out the Mozilla Observatory, and it would check your website for HTTP headers. It would check the entirety of your server HTTP headers. You know, what OS you're using, what version, all that other stuff. And it would help you create a very strong CSP, but it will also help you check a lot of these other things. And it'll go through some of the differences between, CSP best practices, having HSTS, and then submitting your domain to the preload list, which is maintained by Google, to have it set to this third party organization that a lot of the other browsers respect. And that way, your domain is in a list that is pushed to the browser regardless of what the user does. You don't have to go to the website for it to fetch it and say, the next time we go to this website and any other time after that, we're only going to accept HTTP traffic. It's already going to be there. So yeah, I will add that as well. The next thing was DNSSEC, DNS security extensions. This was really interesting. So, DNS in summary is a domain name server, domain name solution. What is DNS? Yeah, domain name system, domain name server. Nice. Domain name system. So DNS, you type in a URL, and the URL goes out and turns into an IP address. It checks the TLD or top level domain, so .com, for example, and then it looks for the domain and some name servers and a record, etc., etc. That's when it becomes an IP address. But there are ways to change where you look for a domain. You can change your host file on your computer. You can change your DNS resolver by editing your small office home office router configuration. And there are other ways to affect it past that. DNSSEC, the purpose of DNSSEC is to validate the path to a website to help prevent those types of, they're called DNS poisoning. A different type of man in the middle attack. Meaning if I want to go to google.com, I want to make sure I go to the real google.com. But if somebody has, let's say maybe somebody's hacked my computer and edited my host file and I'm not paying attention, or my DNS resolver on my router has been changed, then they could change it to something else, and I could end up using some malicious website that maybe looks just like google.com, and maybe it gives me what I want. Maybe it gives me the results, but at the same time, it's pushing whatever information I just asked for or something else that I'm doing in the browser on my computer. It's pushing that to somebody else at the same time. DNSSEC it's a two-way thing, a two-way road, I'd say though. Because if you have a website, you have a server, you can enable DNSSEC. You can create a DS record. That's what it's called. And you can have that set up for your domain. But most DNS resolvers aren't looking for DNSSEC. So you can have it. You can put it on your website and domain. but you got to keep in mind, it's a great thing to do for the security conscious, but it's not something that's going to be enforced probably for a while, because a lot of DNS resolvers aren't touching it. And so you need to use if a user wants to use it, wants to validate domains that he or she looks to visit, they need to use a specific DNS resolver that's going to validate and check for it. And what happens is, if I check for google.com and let's say it has DNSSEC enabled, I'm using a DNSSEC resolver that checks and authenticates and requires DNSSEC. But somehow my query for google.com goes not to google.com. I just won't get anything. The browser just won't show me anything. That's really cool. That's something to look into if you're security conscious. Whether you have a website or you're an online user. If you're listening to this, then you're probably curious about open source software and security in some way. I would hope. So that's, it says the cPanel, Ansible, cybersecurity training. Past that, the biggest things, no, these aren't big at all. Tinkering with Ardour every once in a while. It's a music production software. It's a free open source DAW or digital audio workstation. And it's a decent option for, I like to tell people it's comparable to Pro Tools. And then many times I'll also tell people that if you want an open source option, or just, you just want something free, LMMS, that's Lima Mike Sierra, LMMS is a good option for those who prefer the FL Studio workflow. With the boxes, with the piano, for the piano roll as a secondary option. But you also have the step sequencer. Yeah, the boxes for the step sequencer. They're very comparable in that way. And that's all I have regarding Linux in 2019. Everything outside of that has been music production. I've been hardcore trying to learn more about music production, reading, experimenting with things, putting out music. I got curious. I checked out my YouTube channel for last year, and I started with some tech stuff, simple screen recorder, Audacity, Qtracctor, which is another audio editor, audio media DAW. And then most of the other stuff is music. The One Tonight, Real Man Remix, Chopped and Screwed, Can I, You Got My Lice. I did a intro page or intro video for the YouTube channel. Welcome to Go Live Lively. And then there's podcast Linux 2018. And then I go back to doing music, Barracks Night. And then I put out some tech stuff. An article, a video on how I use Kdenlive, a video on how I use Subtitle Editor for putting out my YouTube videos when I don't want to use a text editor to create subtitles for videos. I also did Kid3Qt, a quick tutorial. I'm really curious why that video, it's my third most popular YouTube video with 2,000 views, but it's got 5 downvotes. I have no reason why. I have no idea why. I'm curious as to why. No one said anything about their issues with it, or if there's something maybe I said wrong. Curious about that. and of course, the unique My GIBO story 2015 T.O.P. it'll happen. And like I said at the beginning, that last video T.O.P. I did that in September, 11 months ago. Now I can say that I do all my audio and video editing in Linux using Kdenlive, Audacity, GIMP, like a new image manipulation program. I did read a couple months ago, someone had done a fork of GIMP, and they're calling it something else. They're planning to add different types of features. There was an issue with, for what I read, I don't know about the validity of any of it, and this was a while ago. But I remember reading an article about someone saying they had asked the GIMP developers to change the name so that it's not the acronym isn't disrespectful to others, and the developers said no. So now there's another group that plans to fork off the software to something else. I haven't checked on that in a couple months since I first heard about it, but I thought that was interesting. I hadn't thought too much about that one. So yeah, Kdenlive, Audacity. That's not really much on doing anything new. I've been doing that since I've been putting out YouTube videos. And if it wasn't Kdenlive, it was OpenShot, which I still care about. I still support that product because of its ease of use. Kdenlive is a suite. It does a lot of stuff. But if someone says, I just want to make basic videos and I don't want to ask them what OS they're using, I can confidently say OpenShot will let you do a basic video with no problem. I can always feel confident telling people that. But that hasn't been too much of a change since I've been doing YouTube videos for the last 5-6 years. So I'm checking. I've been talking for a good bit. That was Linux. That was some Linux news, some music production news. And I'm still doing a lot of the music stuff. I'll talk more about it at another time. But if you got questions, if you want to know more about what I've been doing, check out the website, jtspratly.com, or just look me up. If you search my name in your favorite search engine, I should come up with no problem. GoLiveLively.com. I still own the domain, but if you want to read the blog, the domain is jtspratly.com/blog. Just go straight there. And that way you're not disappointed or confused if at any time there are changes to the domain status of GoLiveLively.com. I own jtspratly.com and I'm using that primarily now. If you want to see, and that's where you can see a good snapshot of my portfolio. The music, I think right now I've embedded a Spotify widget. So all my music on Spotify shows up there, either the music or my first album, Archive 1. But I have my Spotify embedded. I have my latest YouTube video embedded. And then I have links to other places I've written, such as the Syracuse InfoSpace blog, RallyPoint, the Military Veterans Forum, and I may add some other stuff soon. But yeah, that's it. So go live lively. But yeah, that's it. Well, in summary, Yeah, so that's it in summary. There's been learning other cloud server software that can compare to cPanel. A dabble in Ansible, cybersecurity training, Linux DAW software, and a lot of music production. Thanks for listening. If you want to hear more, don't forget to subscribe or follow me on Twitter or follow the RSS feed at jtspradley.com/blog/feed, I think it is, in your favorite RSS reader. Follow me on Spotify. I'm also on, I think, Deezer. There's Deezer, Spotify. I'm also on Amazon, iTunes, and if you just want to hear the music, there's always the JT Spradley Topic YouTube channel. All right. Go live lively. Take care.